if you're aware of what you're doing, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. Hello.
Hello to a new episode of the Days of Change podcast. Oh my God, how many awesome guests I have talked to so far, and the list is getting better by the episode. You will find a list of all episodes and further resources on our website, which is changedays.com/podcast. Today, what shall I say? I will be talking to a person I admire a lot, or should I say a person who I really fell in love with because she embodies so many things that I cherish as well. A deep sympathy for human beings, the joy of life, traveling, a glass of red wine, road cycling, which I found out recently, and a light touch to the seriousness of our experiences. In contrast to other episodes of this podcast, we didn't agree on the focus of this show beforehand. My guest just refused to do it, so it will come as a surprise. However, I have my plans, and I plan to talk about humor, irony, and provocation as secret weapons for changing the world, and probably about what we all can do to grow as human beings. I intend to get some advice on one of my favorite subjects, the creation of high-performance work teams, but I'm prepared for a conversation that will hopefully derail from the prescribed path. So who is this ominous guest today? Sue Knight is one of the great teachers on personal development and coaching that I've met. She teaches NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, all around the world, and we will have to talk about that as well. Sue wrote a book with the title NLP at Work. She is a fun person as well, and she is what I would call an old soul. I connected with her some years ago because I was interested about the work she did with Frank Farrelly, the founder of provocative therapy, and I invited her as a keynoter and a workshop host to the Berlin Change Days 3 years ago. Sue says about herself, I subscribe to the values of openness, truth, integrity, trust, learning, generosity, commitment, fun, and love. And I'm honored to have been described as bringing the heart and soul to business. Sue, you once used the metaphor drilling for oil in a conversation, meaning that you don't know what's going to emerge. I would like very much to drill deep with you today, and I have no idea what's going to emerge, where we are going to. I know that you have a big group of fans, groupies, and followers around the world. He is one of them, and I'm so grateful that you join us today for the Days of Change podcast.
Thank you, Holger. It was a lovely introduction. I was very amused as well by some of the things you said there. Probably just as well it wasn't on video, because I was definitely, just laughing. Yeah.
Well, that's good, because I wanted to ask you, when did you last laugh about yourself?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think just then, really. You called me, an old soul. Well, I am getting on a bit now, so I was amused at that. And it was interesting the other day, I was talking about my cycling, which you mentioned there, and to some people who were in a French lesson with me. And I said I did some I just happened to say I did some cycling. And one of the ladies said, oh, bless you. And I thought, I wonder whether she thinks I just ride a bike with a basket down to the local shop, perhaps. It was the bless you bit, sort of implications.
Sue, do you have a favorite joke?
A joke?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Okay, then let me tell you one I really love. So that goes like that. A man walks into a rooftop bar and takes a seat next to another guy. What are you drinking? He asks the guy. A magic beer, he says. Oh yeah? What's so magical about it? Then he shows him. He swigs some beer, dives off the roof, flies around the building, and then finally returns to his seat with a triumphant smile. Amazing, the man says. Let me try some of that. The man grabs the beer, he downs it, leaps off the roof, and plummets 15 stories to the ground. The bartender shakes his head. You know you're a real jerk when you're drunk, Superman.
Oh dear.
Cool, huh?
Moving on.
Yes. So from where do you actually join us today?
I'm in France.
Where in France?
In the Dordogne. So probably if people are unfamiliar with that area, the main place they might recognize would be Bordeaux. I'm nearly a couple of hours due east of Bordeaux.
As far as I understand, you divide your physical presence into three major parts. Is that right? I mean, you spend parts of spring and summer there in France. Then there are some times when you live somewhere in the UK, wherever.
Yes.
And in winter, each year you go to India for a few months to teach over there.
Yes, they're the main areas. And so I have family in the UK still. And I work there. So they're my main areas of work, France, the UK and India. There are other countries as well, but those are the ones that I probably give most of my time to. They're my homes, really. Each of them feels like home.
And do you still enjoy this kind of life, being divided between three totally different geographical areas?
I do. I like contrasts. I think I appreciate one, because of the other. I do find the transitions tricky sometimes, like coming from India. And I usually come back at the end of February, beginning of March. So I'm coming from a country which is very hot, where there's always somebody to do something for me if I need it, always. And then I come back to France and there's nobody. And I think, who's going to pick up this bag, I wonder?
All right, let's get to how you got to India in just a moment. But I'll Googled you, of course, because I wanted to research. Although I know you, I wanted to research a little bit on you, and I was curious to find out there are several persons, of course, named Sue Knight, and there are several persons who even have a coaching background. Of course, you're the most famous one and the one who appears first. Did you know that there are several persons with your name who do coaching and personal development?
I think I came across one a few years ago, but other than that, I haven't really checked it out.
So what makes you special apart from your specific knowledge and skills and teaching? What should I know about this Sue Knight in order to know her well, apart from what I know already?
Years and years of experience, I suppose, is a great advantage. It's certainly, I think it's one of these areas, one of these fields where age is a bonus. If I think of the people like Frank Farrelly, who you mentioned in the introduction, I mean, he was still going strong and probably getting even more provocative. And he was in his 80s when he died. And I think age and provocation go together very well. You can get away with murder.
Yeah. How did you get into all of this, into your profession? What's the early roots?
Gosh, it's lifetime, really. I think even as a child, a youngster, if we played games in Liverpool, sometimes we'd play schools and teachers, and I'd be the teacher, which is bizarre. But then I very quickly went into a training role, but it was technical training for a while. I worked in an engineering training school, but kind of step by step, I progressed towards personal development and management training, that sort of thing. So it was very gradual, but always heading in this direction.
Tell us how you met Frank Farrelly. When was that? How did it happen? And what was the first impact he had on you?
Oh, wow. It was somebody recommended, one of my associates at the time, who was a great scout for new and different things and people. And this associate, Harry, he had heard about Frank Farrelly. He'd been to a session with him. And he described his experience with Frank, which was quite shocking, really, because Harry was kind of spatially unaware very often. He was a very clever guy, but wasn't very good with spaces. And he said, Frank described me as being like an orangutan dragging its knuckles on the floor. And I thought, oh God, yeah, that does get it really, but how shocking. And he said, you must go and see him. He said, he knew I was interested in new and kind of leading edge things. And so I went to a workshop that was being hosted in the UK. And I'd always avoided when I was doing all my NLP training, and I always avoided being a subject, a demonstration subject. But something about Frank said, I think I need to experience this. And I put my hand up and volunteered to have a one-on-one with him in front of the group. And it was remarkable. And that was the beginning of a very long, loving relationship.
When was that?
That's a good question. I'm not good on past dates, past things.
20 years.
20 years ago, yes, easily.
And Frank died, like, I think 6 years ago, right?
Is it 6 years ago? Gosh, yeah, I keep saying about 4, but yes, probably 6 now.
Yeah, not that long ago. What's the core message of him, and what did you make out of it? Let's start with the core message.
Oh, the core message. Well, I think what the title that they were originally going to give the whole concept, because he developed this approach when he was working in Mendota State Hospital with very severe cases. And when he realized he had something, which was who he was, it wasn't like he developed this thing, it was just the way he was. And they were going to call it protest therapy at first. Mm-hmm. And the whole intention is to provoke in a loving way. That's very important, in a very loving way, with the intention of learning, to the point where the person protests. And protests in this context means that they come back with a congruent response, that they find the truth. They find that core of what they really mean and what they really believe. That's what it's about, really.
Right. And what did you make out of that? How did you transfer that into your own messages?
It was tricky. I studied it, really, first of all, and I decided to invite Frank to run programs for me. So I hosted him for a number of years. And I was really trying to work out, well, how do I integrate this? Humour is a part of my makeup. I mean, I'm from Liverpool, and say that, people have a very natural humour and a very provocative style in Liverpool, which is true. And then I felt that it was time to offer some sessions on conferences, for example, under the heading, and I called it provocative coaching at first. I changed the title subsequently to Coaching with Humour, which actually got a lot more immediate interest. I think the term provocative coaching had a very different effect. And for a while, which I suppose is what happens when we, to use the NLP term, model somebody, and I was modeling Frank, I tried to do it Frank's way. And it was quite aggressive at times. It was incongruent for me, but I was learning a lot. And so it took quite a while before, well, many years really, before I fully integrated it into my own way of being. So it was a very gradual process. I think a lot of it, some of it was there because of my, as I say, my background, my kind of family. But there was so much to learn from him. There's days now, and I have lots of videos of him. And he always said, watch the videos over and over again of him doing one-on-ones with people. There's always more. It's amazing. There's such a great depth to what he was doing. And so there's still times I think, gosh, I'd love to have Frank here just to, ask him about this. But in many ways, I can, to a large degree, put myself in his shoes and kind of imagine what Frank would do.
Yeah. And I experienced that you do great work with that. I learned from you and also from another teacher I had on Frank's technique that one of the most important principles is that staying in love with the client. Can you say something about that?
Absolutely. I think the term provocative has many meanings, and people can think of it as being aggressive or just provoking for the sake of it. But it's provoking in order to raise the client's awareness of the patterns that they have, particularly the patterns that may be limiting themselves from being who they, from being wholly who they are. And to do that in a loving way. So it's one of the disadvantages in a way when people witness someone having, experiencing a provocative style. sometimes those who witness it think, oh, well, I couldn't handle that. But then what's important about it is that it's absolutely gauged for the person that you're talking to at the time. And you're sensitive to that person, what works for them. So it's not one size fits all by any means.
Would you like to try that out with me for a few minutes?
Try it out with you?
Sure, absolutely. I have a little story in my mind, a real story, and let's see where we end just for a few minutes. So I hope I'm not embarrassing myself too much in front of all the listeners, but I'm ready to do it. Okay.
Well, so there's an invitation to embarrass you. What would it take to embarrass you then, Holger?
Okay. Let's see. So my challenge is that
that's my question here. What would it take to embarrass you?
I think I have a great fear of sounding ridiculous, talking rubbish and things like that, because that would undermine my seriousness. There's
lots of people in the sort of conference world who do that and get a lot of money for it. So, I mean, what bothers you about that?
I'm not getting enough money, so maybe that's the thing.
The issue.
So you're saying I should be more ridiculous and embarrass myself more, right?
Well, you could always give it a go. I mean, if what you're doing is not getting you the cash at the minute, why not try a different approach? You never know.
Oh, I'm not sure whether I can do that.
Oh, well, there you go. There's the stopper then. Most people, you offer them the key to paradise and to the successful life. And it's fascinating, those people who say no to it.
I think, Mike, and that's quite interesting because, of course, obviously I diverted already totally from the topic I wanted to talk about, but that's fine because this is an issue as well. I think the fear...
No, this is the issue.
Yeah, it is the issue. It's not that I have a fear of public speaking. I mean, I do public speaking. I mean, I feel that if I'm not really, really well prepared, I mean, I don't sound serious. I don't. Well, I'm not spontaneous. Yeah, serious. Here it is again.
So you have the opportunity to be spontaneously ridiculous and amusing and earn a lot of money, and yet you're afraid to take that step.
Probably I am. Probably I need more courage to do that.
Stick with the cycling then. It doesn't cost too much.
That's true. Thank you so much. So besides staying in the love with the client, is there any other principle of this?
This is called moving on quickly in case you embarrass yourself.
Probably, yes.
So do you recognize what I was doing then?
Well, you were, first of all, obviously listening to keywords, and you were repeating or paraphrasing some keywords and then turning the meaning of what I've put into the words around into the opposite. Is that right?
It's part of it. I think there's a bigger strategy at play there. The key is to recognize the pattern. What's a defining pattern? And very often, usually because somebody is bringing an issue, it's like, so what's the defining pattern that is at the core of this issue? And it's not in what people say, it's in the way that they say it. So what I did with you, and then, one of the strategies is to interrupt the pattern. Just interrupt it in some way. Because basically then you're saying, the contract between us is that I'm not going to let you continue with this pattern. It's like if somebody comes to you, as you did in a way, with a goal for coaching, and they're insistent on telling you that goal. Well, they're probably, because they know it, they're probably not going to get learning from that, but they are much more likely to get learning from being made aware or becoming aware of how they are presenting themselves. So what do you think, for example, was the pattern in you that I was interrupting? Do you know?
Yeah.
Which is? And no patterns are absolutely right or wrong, as you know.
Right.
There's a kind of...
Making myself small?
No. Well, that wasn't, no.
Okay.
It's a pattern in the style of communicating, and you've referred to it many times already
Tell
in
me.
conversation. It's the preparedness, being prepared.
Right.
And
Right.
so you'd prepared an issue to tell me, this is my issue. You'd prepared it. And I interrupted you from telling me that issue. So you're not dealing with the issue, if you like, literally in the contents of the conversation. What Frank would say, well, what he always was you be the answer. You be the solution, if you like. So to interrupt the pattern is a part of being the solution. Now, that can be frustrating because often people will, with that particular pattern, people will persist. You persisted for a while. It's like, let me tell you the story. And it's to continue to challenge the pattern in some way that creates a state of surprise, maybe discomfort, because those are states that underpin change and learning. If someone stays comfortable and consciously talking about what they intellectually know, they're probably not going to change.
Do you tell clients before, or do they know that you're working that way, or does it come as a surprise to them?
Oh, you mean provocatively?
Yes.
It varies. I don't usually say, right, now I'm going to be provocative with you. I think it's so ingrained in me now anyway, that I be it and gauge a reaction. Now, I mean, a lot of my interacting with people is on training programs. So at some point I would talk about what's happening, just as I have with you, unpack it so that they can learn the strategies for themselves. But what's very interesting is living here in France. I'm living in an area where people have chosen to come and live. They're not, there's a lot of locals, of course, who are born into the village life, but many of the people who live here have chosen to come here. And so they're very independent and very resourceful. And I find that along with that, they're very provocative as well. So it's very characteristic of the style of chat that goes on in this little village. And the French are very provocative too. The first time I saw my elderly neighbor, an old French guy, and I was wearing leggings, kind of fancy leggings, he said something like, "Oh, you just come off your horse then." And this was before I'd even introduced myself to it. So it's very characteristic of a French style too.
In your book, NLP at Work, you also talk about the structure of humor. Is there a universal structure of humor?
I think there are certainly some common patterns. So I find that nonverbal behavior, a sort of caricaturing things in nonverbal behavior, seems to generate humor no matter what the culture. I mean, I don't have experience of all cultures in the world, but that's a very, I'll try things to find out what works. But doing things non-verbally with a slight exaggeration, it's almost guaranteed to trigger humor. I do a lot of exercises on my programs that get people to do things with that kind of at the core. And I can guarantee it's a great post-lunch thing to engage in, because I can guarantee people will be energized, they'll be laughing, rather than giving them an exercise, which I rarely do, which is to talk about something.
And with the global work you're doing, did the way you work, or does the way you work always work? I mean, when you first got to India, did you have to adapt? Did you have to find out what's the kind of humor there?
Well, it was interesting going to India because I was told by other people that I talked to who had worked in India, who said, well, your style's going to be not going to work very well, Sue, because you don't use slides. They like slides, they like handouts, they'll like an agenda. We take a lot of information to show people. And I thought, no, that's true. That's not my style at all. And anyway, I didn't do that. That's not who I am. And there were great looks of surprise. And then they just engaged with it. And in fact, I was quite amazed, because on some of my first programs, I had some ladies who had not been out of their village before. They worked as teachers for this organization that was the umbrella organization for me working there. And some of them had to be escorted because their family wouldn't let them come to the program unless they had chaperones, for example. And I thought, how on earth are they going to take it? Well, they just lapped it up. And they were some of the most provocative people I've ever met. And it was like it unleashed something for them. It was fantastic. So I was taken by surprise by that. And in India, there's just so much humor and provocation. You take some of the, sages, some of the gurus there, they're very provocative.
Right.
Your reactions is like, right, okay, moving on.
Yeah, I want to move on a little bit. I want to move on.
There's the pattern, Holger.
Sorry?
That's the pattern.
That's the pattern. I know.
A procedural pattern.
I will cut this part out later on.
Oh, don't you dare.
Let's see.
Oh, come on.
Well, I have so many things I want to talk with you about. I want to talk with you about NLP because this is the core of what you're teaching, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Most of the listener might have heard of it or might have even an education, as I do have. And let me give you my story a little bit, how I got into it. Somehow in the mid of the 90s, somebody asked me to facilitate a workshop in Kazakhstan. That was my first workshop. I had no idea what to do, but I did it. And it worked obviously quite well. It was a strategic workshop for planning a big project. So I came back from Kazakhstan and said, that's something I would like to do. And but how can I learn to work with people? You know, I'm a vet originally. I'm a veterinary doctor from my first.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, that's just that while you can spot patterns in animals.
No, I can't really. I can't. I'm not a good vet. I think I'm better as a facilitator. So anyhow, at that time, I had a friend who coached me. I didn't know the word coaching at the time, but he obviously coached me, and I asked him, what is it, what you're doing? And he said, yeah, it's called NLP and so on. So I got interested, and then I went to learn it, first in Berlin, then with Robert Dills in Santa Cruz. And obviously it gave me a foundation, it gave me a language, it gave me patterns. And then somehow at a certain time, I wouldn't say I distanced myself from NLP, but kind of I moved away a little bit because there were some things I saw critically and others not. But let me understand that better. What's the core, if you summarize the whole big thing of NLP in a few words, what's the core of what you are teaching? What's your take on NLP?
Very much the core technical definition. It's the study of the structure of experience, subjective experience, particularly excellence. That's what it is. I think that gets missed by a lot of people because the result of that, and the ideal result of that, is that we can discover our own ways of developing, of learning. But I think the consequence of that is that many techniques have been discovered, and the techniques are powerful. Some of them are very gimmicky, and I think people do latch onto the techniques, and understandably, but they lose sight of the fact that that's not pure NLP. That's the output of NLP. The NLP is the process of modeling, so that you can discover those things for yourself, not rely on ones that have been discovered by other people. That's empowering to have that. I mean, we're born with it, but we kind of lose it, or it fades because of traditional educational systems and methods. But to have that ability to be aware of what's happening, there's another person I really admire who's no longer alive, Moishe Feldenkrais, and he said, if you're aware of what you're doing, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. Yeah,
and I'm aware of modeling as a key technique, and basically the start of NLP when Bendler and Grinder studied Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir, and then later on the Santa Cruz guys went to
Milton Erickson,
and they studied Frank Farrelly, right? I remembered when I learned the technique for modeling excellence, it was all about studying eye movements and things like that, which I actually think is bullshit or crap, or whatever you might think about it. But
well, it's interesting because I'm just writing a fourth edition of my book at the moment. And I'm just referred to eye movements, that many people say what you say. And yet, I give an example in coaching, for example, when I was coaching somebody. And as I was coaching this person, we were exploring how she felt particularly stressed in certain situations. And she looked up briefly. She was talking to me, looking at me, and then she looked up, and then she carried on talking. And I asked her what happened then in that moment. I didn't say, yeah, she looked up. I said, just what happened then? Because she'd obviously processed something in some way that was fleeting for her. And she said, she thought for a minute, and she said, oh, I just got a picture of my dad and how he used to speak to me when I was young. Now, everybody's eye movements are different, but looking up often is, if you put any faith in it, visual. But I didn't need to know that. It was the fact that she'd shown that she was processing something that was so rapid that her eyes showed it, but her conversation didn't. But in pursuing that, in noticing that and asking about it, it actually revealed a belief-forming moment with her father.
Obviously, I can't argue about that with you, because the mastress. Yeah, I mean, my big critique of NLP isn't. I really use the techniques and the foundations every day in my life, but at some points NLP seems to pretend that it's grounded in science, and it's not really grounded in science, and that's probably the issue. And many people have, of course, accused NLP of doing pseudoscientific stuff without the scientific foundation. I mean, I really like many of the models. I like the principles. I like the study of excellence. But I think there had been, at least in the early days, some issues, and let's not talk about the eye movements anymore, where NLP got onto shaky ground by establishing scientific things which didn't have really strong evidence.
I don't think the people who founded or promoted NLP did that. I think people who like scientific proof sought to do that. I've never said it's find it fascinating, because in modeling, so if I model somebody, like I've modeled Frank Farrelly, I've modeled other key people, modeled Jean Early, my American colleague, for years, and modeling is that process of studying, and I wanted to get the same kind of effect that they were getting. So with Frank, I wanted to get that sudden, rapid shift and amusement, in people about their patterns, such that they got a new way of being. With Jean, at first, I wanted to be able to engage with the group, such that everybody in the group felt that I was speaking to them personally. And the measure of it is whether I get that or not. So it's a study. It's not saying here's a proof. It's a way of studying, and the measure of success is, do you get the result that you're after if you do this? And that's how so I don't see what there is to dispute in that. All the people who do modeling projects on my programs, they're after a particular effect. And if learning these concepts enables them to study themselves and other people to get that effect, well, then it's worked. It's a study of what works. I do get pissed off about that sort of whole scientific thing. I mean, it's rooted, in a lot of the studies by Noam Chomsky, for example, in linguistics. So Grinder and Bandler drew on a lot of areas that have been in existence for a long time. They weren't developing, but then they started to model new things. They started to study how these therapists that they so admired were using language and how they were challenging language. And if it works, it works.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly these linguistic patterns that they established early on, still live with me, and they're so ingrained in the way I work. Absolutely.
Yes.
But it has been now, like 40 years or more since the early days of NLP. How has it changed? Is there still an update, or what I hear it from time to time from Robert Dills, of course, but he also does other things together with Stephen Gilligan with his generative work. What do you see as the presence or the future of NLP?
Well, it's inevitable if it's studying what works that you're going to keep on discovering things that work. And some of those things feed back into the whole process. I mean, clean language is an example of that. So Penny Tompkins and James Lawley, met David Grove. I met David Grove, and he was a remarkable therapist. And they set about modeling him because he hadn't published much, he didn't record very much, and they modeled him. And out of that, I mean, he did many, many things, but out of that came clean language and clean questions, which was how they kind of boiled it down in a way to that. I might not sound too complimentary, but they got the essence of what he was doing in one of his approaches. And then the clean questions I found out hugely valuable in the context of modeling, because they're about keeping yourself out of it and discovering, what somebody else does, being naive. And I likened it in the last edition of my book, I likened it to being like a compost heap, that you throw things on the compost, things grow and they die, you throw them on the compost and it feeds new things. So it's generating stuff all the time. And that's the challenge for me in writing the 4th edition. It's like, so what's new?
I'm curious to see that. And I just downloaded a few days ago the last edition. So I'm curious to see what's in the new edition. A lot of changes, or just a few, or?
Well, last time in the 3rd edition, I added, so just to go back to that, I added the humour, the coaching with humour, provocative. I added some things about time, which I hadn't included before. And I added the clean questions and clean language. And I think that kind of order, that level of inclusion, and it's interesting because the provocative work and the clean work, they were fundamental to the way I was working. And yet I hadn't included them in the previous edition when I was using them then. And it's very interesting because that's how the whole thing is. It's that often the things that are the most valuable, the difference that makes a difference, are the things we take for granted. So I kind of asked myself that question with the 4th edition. What am I taking for granted that I do now, that I use, that I haven't shared, that I haven't written about in this way? And certainly developments in the provocative coaching. And there's a whole thing about meta messages, which I did write about a long time ago. And yet I refer to that, what's the bigger message in what we're doing, in the way we are. But I may also include something on Feldenkrais, because it's just totally in parallel with me, with NLP for me. It's awareness through movement. Whereas with NLP, you're getting awareness primarily through patterns in thinking and language and movement, but the emphasis in Feldenkrais is on the movement.
And that's interesting. Maybe that leads me to one more topic I wanted to talk about, the work with teams, because as I said, I work a lot with teams, and it becomes even more important now with the whole agile movement to have really functioning teams and to have transparency and honesty and things like that. And most of my work is around that. How could this technique of meta messages or other stuff that you describe help teams to get more productive? How could they apply it?
Ooh, big question.
Sure. We're coming to the end, so let me have some big questions at the end.
Questions.
And you are the person for big questions anyhow, so that's...
Well, some questions require, or in asking for a generalized answer, and whereas it's the specific.
Okay.
But nevertheless.
Okay. Let me make an example.
Okay.
Here is a dysfunctional team, and the dysfunction can be described along that they are not honest to each other.
Right.
They beat around the bush, some of them less, some of them more, and they accept an underlying power structure without addressing it. And that makes them ineffective.
Do you know one of the most powerful you may not like this bit, you might cut this from the recording, Holger. One of the most powerful self-development or any kind of development concepts and questions I've ever come across. And it's which I learnt from Jean Early, my mentor, and it's the apply to self.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that a lot, so go on.
Well, so how is that true about you?
Mm-hmm.
That would be the question. And because I'm saying it to you,
yeah,
it comes back and bites me on the bum as well. It's like, so how am I these things? So the person who's asking the question or making the observation, it's like, how is that true about me or them? And what's the learning in that? So the learning then comes from the inside out, because as you look at the structure of that and you find ways to shift that structure, it's like, how do you manage your internal team in order to manage the external team, basically?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And how honest I am with my clients, and do I beat around the bush? I'm totally aware of that. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So how do you be the example of the answer? How do you be the answer?
Yeah. Is that a question or a rhetorical question?
Both.
Yeah.
Always say yes. When a client asks a question, always say yes.
No, absolutely. No, I mean, no, and I won't cut that out, because I think it's really true. Yeah. I mean, I'm battling with that all the time. I'm trying to be conscious about it, where I speak the truth, where I'm honest. I mean, I'm not lying, obviously, to clients, but sometimes I'm careful for all kinds of reasons, because I don't want to lose the client, because I fear that my message doesn't get understood or whatsoever. But I'm trying to be honest. But yes, it's
so trying to be honest is not quite the same as being honest. So one of the things that Frank, I think, was an example
you got me again.
Oh, I'll get you, Holger. I think the thing about Frank was he spoke the truth that other people weren't prepared to speak, or the truth that people thought but didn't say.
Yeah.
And what was very, very important was that it didn't matter to him whether people liked him or not. So you didn't say those words, but if, for example, you have a concern about keeping a client, I know how they'll react, it will inevitably get in the way of being truthful.
Sure.
Now, I'm not suggesting you just say things that piss people off.
Why not? Maybe I need to. No. I mean, I'm absolutely aware of what you're saying, and of course, you hit another chord with what you just said, and that's probably the deeper truth about it. I want to be loved. I mean, we all want to be loved, but I in particular want to be loved. I know that's one of my my drivers.
Forget provocative then. Although the irony of provocative is that although you're not going for that, and you're prepared to take any response and therefore be truthful, is that often people do love you for it, but it's not the goal.
Yeah.
I had somebody in India, I was talking about people having these different reactions, and I had a guy in India who was very cautious and very reticent and very shy, and he came on a program. I usually run 2 or 3 programs there, and he came on a program in January. And he was very softly spoken. He would very rarely speak up. And we went into provocative. And he came back on the next program in the February, and he was a changed person. And I think he'd experienced a lot of domination in his family from his father. I think he'd been, sort of quelled and bullied a lot. And he came back and he stood up and he spoke to the whole group in the most amazing way. And he said, this provocative stuff has set me free.
And it does.
Yeah.
Sue, what's up for you next? What are your plans for the next 1 or 2 years, if you have any, or just?
My plans tend to revolve around my schedule, which is usually about a year to 18 months on. So I've got my commitments to my existing places, like the UK, although it's getting a little bit less, the work there. Certainly the work in France. I've got a big alumni and an event with Jean Early here in France in June, and I run programs here. I've just started to work in the last couple of years with people who've come out of, or who are still in townships in South Africa, who have a background of violence and who are seeking to help the youth of South Africa escape that, which is remarkable people. My work in India continues. I just love that. And I'm probably going to start work in Oman for the first time. So occasionally time permitting and lifespan permitting as well. Occasionally a new country comes, but emotionally, I feel like I can't emotionally engage with much more than that because they're very emotionally involving. I work with a housing organisation in the UK as well that are not just putting roofs over people's heads, but they're helping people who are homeless find their place in the world. That's very different to what many housing organisations do. And that kind of work is very emotionally involving. I mean, all the work is. So yeah, that's what's on the, and then the writing. So I'm very good at procrastinating writing, but I have started to get into it. That's what you can do anything, sort of go on a bike ride.
Yeah, and bike riding is better anyhow for your health than sitting at the desk. Actually, the story I wanted to talk with you about for the little coaching session was also about writing, because for 15 years I've been procrastinating and avoiding to write a book. I made it up to 270 pages in a novel. Anyhow,
I think you should write about the art of procrastination first. You're an expert at it.
Maybe that's a good idea. Sue, I have one last thing I would like to talk with you about. You honored the Berlin Change Days twice, and you got a little bit an idea of what the spirit is about and what we are doing there. Can you describe your experiences you had there?
Yes, and I think a lot of that experience came from beforehand. There's an aura about the Berlin Change Days. I felt very honored that you invited me to present there. And I think you're really leading edge. It's very different. There's something very electric about it for me. And I just knew there'd be a whole variety. I had a sense, and it was my experience as well. There's a whole variety of people. But often I'll go to conferences and I think, oh, same old stuff, and I don't hang around too much. But there, I thought, wow, you had somebody whose session I didn't actually see, but he was talking about how we show up, just reading about it and hearing a little bit about it, that had a big impact on me. So the things and the people, you have a way of connecting with people, I think, who bring something very special and very significant to the world.
Thanks very much. And we try to widen that by having Toronto Change Days. Last year there was the first Toronto Change Days, and this year is the second one.
Yes.
We are talking with other countries, but what we also want to do is we want to bring that experience into the world of organizations. So that means we want to offer that as a model for doing kickoff workshops, large gatherings in organizations. So that's next for me.
Wow. Yes, that's exciting. I think you have a tremendous reputation. And that speaks volumes, that this reputation, that people want to be included. They're not just going just to show up and, present their wares. They just want to be a part of this community. It's on the button in terms of what's needed in the world.
Thank you so much for that words. Sue, our conversation comes to an end, although I would like to continue for hours, and I really think we need to do that face to face again over a glass of nice red. Thank you so much.
Watch out for this with red wine. I'm even more provocative.
I know. Thanks so much for being on this show, and all the best to you. And I really admire the work you're doing. You're doing important stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holger. It's lovely to talk with you. Thank you so much for asking me.